It's devastating. But that is the reason why they did this release, this show of force, this show to basically say, look, the conditions that you claim that these hostages were in is not the conditions that they were actually in. And all matter of death and devastation that they experienced came in the hands of Israeli campaigns. All right. We are going to talk about the Gaza ceasefire and the 4 Israeli hostages freed by Hamas in swap for 200 Palestinian prisoners. Now, hostages, these are 4 Israeli prisoners of war. These are 4 Israeli soldiers. Okay? Make no mistake. Channel 4, albeit is one of the best Western outlets out there in terms of communicating exactly what's going on in Gaza to the best of their ability. Okay? And yet there's still a bar there. While they clear that low bar, it's still far from the appropriate way of talking about these issues. So it's something you should understand. And the reason why it is especially important to recognize in this situation is because in order to combat that narrative, Hamas this time around made them wear their IDF garb in their release. Okay? Now, remember, for the past 16 months, Israel has propagandized about both the understandable, the devastation of October 7 and the subsequent propaganda that consistently claimed, without any evidence whatsoever, mind you, that these Palestinians are all barbaric rapist monsters and that they had no political motivations and no interest in emancipation whatsoever in any of their actions, but simply are operating on anti-Semitic tendencies and did this because they despise Jewish people and want to rape them, right? They kidnapped people not because they wanted a political bargaining chip, a leverage over the sovereign occupying nation that has dominated their existence with no means of emancipation whatsoever, no way out of this horrifying process whatsoever in a concentration camp that is also known as Gaza, the world's largest open-air prison, but instead for selfish, violent desires. So this initiative, the way that this release happened from Hamas's designs here was to combat that misinformation, to showcase that, one, to the best of their limited abilities under a ruthless and brutal blockade and consistent bombing, that international organs of justice and humanitarian groups, including Israeli humanitarian groups, have called a genocide, militants tasked with Palestinian emancipation and the resistance against the Israeli apartheid and Israeli genocide, were able to successfully secure the well-being to the best of their abilities of the prisoners that they had taken. This completely undermines the Israeli narrative. If you recall, there was a lot of back and forth in Israeli media talking about how these girls are being raped every day. They're pregnant. They fear for the worst. There was no evidence for this whatsoever. Okay? Not to say that this would never happen, right? I'm not saying that at all. As I've maintained throughout my coverage of October 7, and as I've talked about consistently, even in other instances, right? Sexual violence and sexual assault is all too common in the field of battle, okay? It happens all the time. So there is a likelihood that it could have happened here as well. And yet, there was no evidence to suggest that it had happened to these hostages. But at the time, the colonizers' imagination was the only evidence necessary. I-24 said Israel prepares for female hostages in Gaza to return pregnant. Report, Israel permits abortion up to the moment of birth. Medical professionals stress the mental toll of conceiving through in captivity. More than 9 months, Hostage Family Forum publishes videos implying pregnant hostages. The video depicts a tunnel, which cuts to a video of a pregnant woman and the sound of a baby crying. And yet when they were released, unlike the horrifying conditions of the Palestinians that were falsely detained by the Israeli apartheid regime, in spite of the fact that they literally were also side by side with Palestinians experiencing the ruthless Israeli campaigns, they came across far healthier than the Palestinian prisoners that are released on a daily basis.
If all goes well, the end of this nightmare is in sight. Hamas fighters walking the 4 young Israeli soldiers they've held for 477 days since the awful events of October 7th to a podium in Gaza City. Karina Ariev, Daniela Gilboa, Liri Olbag and Nama Levy wave at the cameras they know are beaming footage back home to their friends and
New conspiracy, they gave birth and the babies are hostage now? I have a horrible theory. What if they were impregnated, gave birth, and now released without their babies? And now Hamas is blackmailing and using those babies to keep them from telling the world what happened. It's not out of the realm of possibility for the sick animals. 420 likes. I would treat those babies like the devil's spawn. But 1, they're Jewish. 2, aren't babies innocent and have no say in how they're born? And they're the seed of devil subhumans. So it's interesting to see in real time how a population that has been completely captive to fascist propaganda that spawned over almost an entire century, right, reacts to situations like this. One day, if the world has not completely fallen to authoritarian fascism, historians will look back at these moments and document and will greatly, I guess, elevate the field of fascist scholarship surrounding and historical research surrounding how a captive population receives fascist doctrine and how it changes their collective psyche. This is the fantasies of an insane person, okay? And it's happening in real time, and it's very consequential. Like, this is the very fact that people don't immediately go, this is the most insane thing I've ever heard in my entire life. You are out of your mind. And instead, people go, you know what? You're probably saying a very scary truth right now, is damning for anyone with any critical thinking skills. Okay? It's devastating. But that is the reason why they did this release, this show of force, this show to basically say, look, the conditions that you claim that these hostages were in is not the conditions that they were actually in. And all matter of death and devastation that they experienced came in the hands of Israeli bombing campaigns. Now, this has been a consistent thing that we have heard from Israeli hostages that have been released. From the first hostage release that took place on humanitarian grounds, I think her name was Lipschitz, the old lady, all the way to even the likes of Noah Argani, who was a very famous Israeli captive that was taken from the Nova Festival, if you recall. Most Israeli hostages and prisoners of war have repeatedly said the exact same things, that the real fear that they experienced was the bombs falling on them indiscriminately. And even Israeli news has reported this, in spite of the obvious restrictions placed upon Israeli media from its fascist government. I fear, and I say this with sincerity, I fear this has happened throughout history under very similar circumstances, as a matter of fact. If you recall, the entire concept of the Manchurian Candidate, going all the way back to the Korean War for a brief moment, is born out of a very similar perspective. The American government, the American State Department, alongside American interests in the region, consistently dehumanized both the Koreans and the Chinese, right? And because of that, when when American soldiers were held captive by the Koreans or the Chinese, they were not mistreated, yet the media kept saying that they were. So when they actually came back and reported on their actual experiences, while we were supposed to maintain the position that these are some of the most like fucked over people, right? They were held captive by the enemy because they did not play along with American propaganda. We assumed that they were brainwashed. We assumed that they had actually fallen to communist brainwashing. Literally comes from this. It was first utilized by American media to explain the process of how soldiers being held by Korean and Chinese communists did not have negative opinions about them, and more so started talking about imperialism in certain instances. That's where the term brainwashing comes from. Something that is in, our colloquial, it's in common lexicon at this point. Something that you just don't even think about. That's where it literally comes from. Isn't that crazy? The idea that the treatment, the expectation was that our enemy will treat our soldiers in an inhumane way. Pure projection. And when the reality doesn't match the expectations and the lies, we turn around and we say, well, there's something more nefarious afoot. Okay? This was the testimony of Noah Argamani, a freed Israeli hostage that was featured widely in Israeli media that claimed she was beaten and abused while in captivity. An hour ago, she posted a clarification on her Instagram story saying the Israeli media basically lied about it at all. Here is her own words. I can't ignore what has been going on in the media here in the last 24 hours. Things are out of context. They didn't beat me and didn't cut my hair. I was in a building that was blown up by the Air Force. The exact quote is, this weekend after my shooting, as I said, I had cuts all over my head and hit my whole body. I emphasize, they didn't hit me, but I was hurt all over my body from the collapse of the structure on me. As a victim of the 7th of October, I will not allow myself to be a victim again by the media. And what's additionally shocking about this is that these are people who live in Israel. These are people who are also susceptible to the same propaganda cycles when they, grew up with this social conditioning. And yet, even they are like, dude, that's not the case. Like, you are using my own personal experience and my own personal story, the horrifying conditions that I went through to lie. This girl, yes, met Trump. Here it is.
Phase.
Whoa.
I'm excited, but we knew this moment would come.
What is this audio, man?
We had no doubt it would come. It's been too long. They're on their way home, and we're waiting for all the other hostages.
In return, in Ramallah, the West Bank, Israel began releasing Palestinian prisoners, 200 in total, some taken by minibus to Khan Yunis, Gaza.
We thank the Palestinian resistance, specifically Al-Qassam brigades and Al-Quds brigades, and we thank every Palestinian resistance fighter.
But those who'd been convicted of the most violent crimes won't be allowed home, instead deported outside the Palestinian territories, this bus crossing the border to Egypt. Large swathes of Gaza lie in ruins. For the ordinary Gazans whose lives have been torn asunder by Israel's devastating pursuit of Hamas.
So here's more footage from their release as well. Breaking, Netanyahu says Israel will block Palestinian return to North Gaza until dispute over captive Arbel Yehud is settled. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has issued a statement saying Israel will not allow Palestinians to cross into northern Gaza as agreed upon in the ceasefire deal until the issue of the female civilian captive Arbel Yehud, who Israel expected to be released on Saturday, is resolved. Earlier, Israeli military spokesperson Avichai Adrae wrote on X that Hamas had violated the ceasefire agreement. Hamas released 4 IDF soldiers this morning. 200 Palestinian captives are set to be released shortly, and they have been, I think. Now, here is some information about this as well. Hold on. Seth Harp says, strict adherence to the laws of war and dignified treatment of your enemy confers a powerful strategic advantage in the long term. Hamas is constantly outsmarting Israel. See, this is like perhaps the most logical way of looking at it, to a degree where, like, even if you believe that there are some really bad guys in Hamas, and that's an understandable position to have, right? Especially if you're, a fucking American. Like, it is the logical thing to do. Do you understand? It's kind of the same principle that I maintained throughout the past 15 throughout the past 15, 16 months, where people would come in here and be like, no, they're definitely killing the hostages. And I kept repeating over and over again, there is no logical reason for Hamas to just execute a hostage without showing it on camera. Okay? If you recall, I kept saying, if Hamas kills a hostage, if Al-Qassam kills a hostage, if the Palestinian Islamic Jihad kills a hostage, you will know. Because they will use that as propaganda. They will, because these hostages are their only form of leverage. These hostages are a bargaining chip. So their welfare, their well-being is of supreme importance. Okay? When the enemy is doing a genocide on your people, you have to protect them no matter what. So the notion that these guys actually had kidnapped these people in this incredibly complex, unimaginable military operation that actually yielded a tremendous amount of trauma and horrifying atrocities in the process, make no mistake, right? I'm not an apologist on any of that. That was not done for simple pleasure, okay? You have to be a fucking idiot to assume that. It was not done because they wanted to kidnap Israelis and like rape them and kill them for funsies. It was done for a very clear purpose. And this is the issue that I have specifically with foreign policy. Foreign policy in the United States of America is riddled with thought-terminating terms and media cycles. Okay? The designation of terrorism. The notion that all of the enemies of America and all of the enemies of America's allies are actually operating with this like parasitic hive mind modus operandi, that they don't have any sort of like they don't have any sort of like logical investment or interest in emancipation. They don't have any humanity, right? That they're simply operating on the lines of doing brutality, right? If that is the method, if that is the way you approach it, and many, because of the way that the media covers this stuff, many in America do approach it like that. It's a war of good versus evil, yada, yada, yada. You are going to always find yourself confused when you see stuff like this. And in that confusion, because you're not exercising critical thinking, in that confusion, you're just going to fall further and further into the whims of propaganda. And that's how you arrive at the concept of brainwashing. That's how you arrive at these like grand narratives, right? That like maybe these people actually did rape them and are holding their babies hostage, and that's why they have to play ball. And it also, weirdly enough, will create resentment in the Israeli population against the prisoners, the hostages that have been released, if they come out and say, no, these guys didn't actually rape us, like you're insane. Okay? Now, I'm not 100% certain about the well-being of these soldiers. Okay? I'm not. I don't know, and only time will tell. But from what I've seen from Israeli media so far, is that people are worried about like what, how the Israeli prisoners of war are carrying themselves thus far because of this sort of footage. No humiliation, dignified in their military uniform. This is our prisoners of war must be treated under international law. On the other hand, civilians, doctors, journalists, women, and children are kidnapped and tortured and raped in Israeli dungeons. Hamas has learned from the past history of the Palestinian resistance. In 1983, PLO had captured an IDF soldier in Lebanon, Hezi Shai, look him up, and he tried to commit suicide because, as he said later, I wanted to screw the Palestinians and deprive them of their bargaining chip, and Arafat had ordered that his captors keep him alive at all costs until he was released in 1985 in exchange for 1,000 Palestinians. Yeah. Oh, by the way, this is another part of this. MK Ultra, the program, like this is what's so interesting about both American history and the history of empire in general, is that things that we know, right? Like the MK Ultra program, which was a failure. It didn't reach its intended goals. I mean, it maybe was successful in some ways, but it was ultimately a failure that like the American government had no way of like brainwashing people and like controlling them, right? That program literally was created to, as the chatter correctly points out, reverse engineer the Manchurian candidate communist brainwashing. Now, what's really interesting about that process is that not only do we tell lies, right, when the reality on the ground does not match our expectations or the lies that we've told prior, we then believe our own lies. Think about that. Like, these are people who looked at the situation and were like, there is no way that they were actually not mistreated. These American soldiers were not actually mistreated, and they simply are brainwashed, a concept that we made up, that they're actually secretly sleeper cells being activated to undermine American dominance or whatever, right? And that we should also do the same and reverse engineer how they were brainwashed and figure out a way to do it ourselves. It's interesting. Like, it's fascinating when you think about it, where you tell a lie so much that you yourself believe it and then decide that spend money and effort to try to create your own version of it. Understand? When the alternative is simple, which is, I don't know, take the truth at face value, investigate thoroughly. Nope. Can't do that. Can't do that. God forbid we do that. We can't do that. Hold on. It's like the Republicans. Yeah, it would be akin to the Republicans trying to build a weather machine to control the weather after consistently claiming that, like, there's a Chinese weather machine. And then they try to, like, build their own version of it, you know, instead of addressing climate change. Which, now that you said it, now that I'm thinking about it, is probably something that we are going to do. I can't wait for Pete Hegseth to oversee this operation. Pete Hegseth's like, listen, we have to make our own Jewish Chinese weather machines. And as the Secretary of Defense, I'm going to be working tirelessly around the clock to make our own. We're tasking some of our top Jewish and Chinese scientists to make a Jewish Chinese weather machine ourselves. It cannot be only in the hands of the CCP. The American government must have this technological advancement. What is this? For the military and intelligence communities, mind control hovered between myth and science. Nowhere is this more obvious than the peculiar case of an anonymously published 1955 pamphlet called Brainwashing, a synthesis of the Russian textbook on psychopolitics, which purported to be a translation of a work by the Soviet secret police chief Lavrentiy Beria, full of wild claims about how the Soviets used psychology and drugs to control the masses. The pamphlet has a peculiar section devoted to the ways that Dianetics, a pseudoscience invented by the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, could prevent brainwashing. As a result, it is widely believed that Hubbard himself wrote the pamphlet as black propaganda, or propaganda that masquerades as something produced by a foreign adversary. The defecting MK Ultra was trying to stop. Yeah, this is it. Yeah. This is what MK Ultra tried to stop. I wonder if Israel has their own version of this too.
You will be brainwashed. Me? America's son? Ha! That will be a challenge. You bet. Our enemies are all those in league with imperialism. The bureaucrats, the big landlord class, and the reactionary section of the intelligentsia attached to them. You!
I love this. Looking for a cool interview? Japanese Red Army founder Fusako Shigenobu carried out attacks of the Palestinian cause. Fusako Shigenobu, 76, was one of the world's most notorious women during the 1970s and 80s when her left-wing group carried out attacks worldwide in support of the Palestinian cause. No way. I feel strongly that I've finally come out alive, she said, welcomed by her daughter and a crowd of reporters and supporters in Japan's capital, Tokyo. Shigenobu, 76, was one of the world's most notorious women during the 1970s and 80s when her left-wing group carried out armed attacks worldwide in support of the Palestinian cause. Shigenobu left the prison in Tokyo in a black car with her daughter. Several supporters held a banner saying, "We love Fusako." The Palestine Youth Movement welcomed Shigenobu's release and described her as a lifelong comrade of the Palestinian people in struggle. That would be an incredible interview to conduct. I would love to do that. I apologize for the inconvenience my arrest has caused so many people. It is a half a century ago, but we caused damage to innocent people who were strangers to us by prioritizing our battle, such as by hostage taking. Shigenobu traveled to Lebanon in 1971 and founded the Japanese Red Army, which linked up with the Palestinian fighters to become an implacable foe of Israel. The group turned into one of the world's most feared armed groups because of its deadly and spectacular acts, from plane hijackings to hostage taking, mostly in the 1970s. Shigenobu is believed... Dude, the 70s were so crazy for plane hostage taking. Like, it is wild that for virtually 3 decades... right? Air travel was kind of hit or miss, where you could just bring a gun on a fucking plane and be like, this is mine now. It was truly a wild time, dude, when you think about it. Like, that's not that long ago. Like, your parents were alive when this stuff was happening. Isn't that crazy? It would happen all the time. They should bring that back, and also smoking. You should be able to smoke on planes. You should be able to blast lung darts on planes, and also sometimes, maybe like every now and then, just to spice things up, a little bit of hostage taking. I'm joking, by the way. Don't take me seriously when I say that. They were kind of crazy, not in a good way. Insane urban guerrillas.
It was rather.
That's no. Dude, it was a different time. Okay, trust me. I know it is kind of wild. Like that. This is just a thing that people used to do, though. Trying to get on the no-fly list, so you're stuck in Japan. Okay, I'm obviously joking. I hope people understand that. Jesus Christ. Oh my God. Imagine people clipping that and being like, he wants more hostage taking. And smoking and blasting lung darts on planes is like, dude, it's a joke. Okay, calm the fuck down. No, I don't think it would be great if commercial air travel was riddled with hostage taking. Hijacking story was in 1985 when Hezbollah hijacked a plane made a birthday cake inside the plane for a Greek singer hostage because the chief hijacker used to love his songs. Lol. Shigenobu is believed to have masterminded the 1972 machine gun and grenade attack on Tel Aviv's Lod airport, which killed 26 people and wounded 80 others. Member Kozo Okamoto, who was injured and arrested in the Israeli airport attack, was released in 1985 in a prisoner exchange between Israeli and Palestinian forces. He is reportedly in Lebanon. Okamoto and several other members of the group are still wanted by Japanese authorities. The Japanese Red Army also took responsibility for the takeover of the U.S. consulate in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia in 1975. After bombing a U.S. military facility in Naples, Italy in 1988, the group conducted no more major attacks and faded from view in Japan. The former soy sauce company worker turned fighter was arrested in Japan in 2000 and sentenced to 20 years behind bars, 6 years later for a part in a siege of the French embassy in the Netherlands. She had lived as a fugitive in the Middle East for 30 years before resurfacing in Japan. Shigenobu's daughter, May, born in 1973 to a father from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, hailed her mother's release on social media. Shigenobu maintained her innocence over the siege, in which 3 Red Army assailants stormed the French embassy, taking the ambassador and 10 other staff hostage for 100 hours. What a difference. Dude, you're right. Oh my God, it's because of the lead. Oh my God, this is the lead generation. The lead generation went in 2 different, in only 2 different political ideology. Either they were like violent radicals that engaged in violent acts of resistance in the most insane ways possible, but like at the behest of a socialist or leftist communist emancipatory cause, or they became small business owners and your parents and great grandparents and grandparents basically that now fantasize about killing black teenagers with their rocket launcher that they think is protected by the Second Amendment. Like HVAC business owners who want to do January 6th all the time, nonstop. It's crazy. What the hell is wrong with that generation? It's crazy. That generation is out of control, man. Here she is with Ghassan Kanafani. Oh my God. Fusako Shigenobu, Japanese communist and founder of the leader of the Japanese Red Army. The GRA. Dude, this would be a fantastic interview, actually. I would love to talk to her. We did overcorrect on lead paint. Now it's microplastics, which is like having the opposite impact. It's pacifying, perhaps too much, an entire generation and making them gay, brother. Anyway, there's more video that came out. Here is the Al-Qassam, the Israeli hostages that were released. Also, were speaking Arabic.
Assalamu alaikum, marhaba. شكرا لكتاب القسام على كل المعاملة الكويسة. شكرا. Once again, this is propaganda for the record. Like, I make no mistake. This is absolutely propaganda. It's also kind of wild how high quality it is. It's like shocking that in spite of the genocide and blockade and all things considered, like they still are. I mean, this is like they're shooting better than I can. They got road mice. They got the TikTok road mice, bro. That's crazy. شكرا للشباب اللي كانوا يحفزوا علينا ودير بالو علينا من كاسف وإن شاء الله يكون الكل يوم سعيد.
She said, Inshallah, like Allah willing, it will be a happy day, the best day, and we will all be well.
كلنا نكون بخير.
يوم 25/1/25.
سلام.
They have better lighting. Yeah. So just so you understand, out of these four Israeli soldiers that were released, I suspect that, you know, they're not all going to have the same opinions, and I'm not certain that they will maintain the position that they were like. They might not echo the same sentiment that other Israeli hostages and Israeli prisoners of war have echoed and have delivered, right? I'm not saying that at all. That only time will tell, right? So we shall see what happens in that process. But even in the interim, as far as we can see, the notion that they were like, like, you know, impregnated, it does not seem to be correct. What is this? Here's drop site news. Oh, this is the full video for the prisoner exchange video. All four Israeli hostages are now reunited with their families. This is a wonderful day, by the way, for the record. This is a great thing. Oh, dude. They give them keychains, Al-Qassam keychains, and yeah, certificates. What is happening, dude? They give him. So I saw these gift bags before. Like they give him goodie bags.
Assalamu alaikum, marhaba, shukran.
So we saw this part already. So obviously every act of existence from the Palestinian side is a form of resistance, as we've talked about quite extensively. But the very fact that these Palestinian militant groups are still capable of operating in Gaza in broad daylight in this way is 100% perhaps the most devastating counter message to everything that Israel has communicated to Israeli society thus far. Okay? It's just like, it's crazy. That hostage comment is going straight to Ethan's videos, mark my words. I mean, okay. Like, I don't know what to tell you, you know, RIP, I guess. I have to sneeze, but I can't. They returned to police stations to 100% operations within days. Yeah, CNN and Hamas appear to be trying to show that it still largely controls Gaza, despite what it was exposed to during the war. I mean, that is the truth. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. I mean, it just, every single part of this is basically a direct counter. Every single part of this is a direct counter to like key ways of communicating. No surprise about the presence of so many Hamas fighters. Oh yeah, no, yeah, Hamas has recruited 10,000 to 15,000 members since the war with Israel began, according to U.S. intelligence brief to Congress. A similar number of fighters have been killed in the same period. Yeah, like who could have thought? Oh man, who could have seen this coming, dude? How shocking that this thing that happens every single time an occupying force dominates an entire region and destroys them, okay? It leads to the resistance growing. This is the least shocking event of all time. But yeah, the key points that are being made in these sorts of videos and in general is like, one, the Israeli hostages were, due to their, you know, leverage, due to them being the only existing form of leverage that Hamas and the Palestinian resistance coalition forces had over the apartheid state that was conducting a genocide, due to them being the only leverage point They were not mistreated to the best of their ability, right? And not only that, but also, I'm going to close the blinds, by the way. It's getting super blown out behind me. But also that they're still in operation. Oh, Fusuko's daughter, she's a journalist and speaks English. Yeah, I might see if I can secure an interview with her. Hold on.
في اشتباك موقع في الطعام وغسل.
I guess from the Israeli side, like if you need to, if you must. Whoa, why is this so dark now? Now it's like shockingly dark and scary. Oh, it's much better now. Never mind. I had to move that other light away. There we go. Now it's good. From the Israeli side, like they have to they have to maintain this position that Hamas is like violent and have no, like, Palestinian resistance is not born out of understandable desire for emancipation against an apartheid state that is dominating their lives, but instead they're scary, they're evil barbarians that only want to do this because they have no reason to do this, but they're doing all of the things, all of the resistance because they're evil, anti-Semitic, rapist, barbaric monsters, right? So they have to maintain that position, and it's one that you can obviously easily destroy, no matter how much control you have over the way these things are shown to the otherwise captive audience. So let's finish this.
Ceasefire is the chance of a new beginning.
Channel 4 video.
But nothing is certain. Hamas, still able to turn out foot soldiers and heavy weapons, are not vanquished. And moments after the 4 hostages were handed over to the Red Cross, Israel said Hamas had reneged on another part of the deal for failing to release civilian Arbel Yehud. Until she's free, they're refusing to allow Palestinians back to northern Gaza. Wadi Gaza is effectively now an internal border with the south, where family...
People who... wait, you said something that's interesting. Hold on, where was it? People who call Hamas violent fail to understand their movement. They are violent. Hamas is violent. Of course they're violent. So is the Al-Qassam brigades are violent. So is the Islamic Jihad. Okay? The Islamic Jihad militancy. And so is PFLP, DFLP. Of course they're violent. Okay? Don't say Hamas isn't violent. They absolutely are. Okay? Guys, how do I... Oh, this guy's baiting. Never mind. Oh, it's one of those guys that probably is like saying this stuff to see how I react to it, or so that people can turn around and be like, see, this is the type of stuff that goes on in Hasan's community. He's like recruiting for Hamas or some shit. Get out of here, dumbass. Of course Hamas is violent, dude. What are you talking about? Okay? Violence exists within the confines of all politics. Politics is about who gets to do violence and how much violence they get to do. Politics is all about the distribution of resources and power. Okay? Violence is a part of that process. Violence is a part of that paradigm. Okay? All of a sudden, everyone is pro-nonviolence when talking about Hamas. I mean, that's also like a delusional perspective, because look at this image. You know what I mean? There is violence that you can see in this image in and of itself, right? It's just that when that violence is dished out by a state, especially a state that is aligned with American interests, a state that is a vehicle for American interests in a region, okay, a incredibly important ally like Israel, that violence is seen as normal. And in order to justify that violence, you have to do a steady diet of propaganda. Okay? Politics is literally about who gets to do the violence in many instances. America gets to do the violence. Anyone who resists against that is bad. Israel gets to do the violence. Anyone who resists against that is bad. That's the violence that is unacceptable. Okay? So there is virtually no movement that has advanced any sort of civil rights or civil liberties or any sort of like emancipatory goals without like engaging in violence. And our history is covered with that. The Revolutionary War was violent. The Civil War was violent, right? How are most borders in the world drawn? Through violence. And there are many different forms of said violence. But we don't need to get into that right now. And this is not like an academic setting.
Gather and wait.
Hamas failed to meet its obligations to first release Israeli female civilian hostages as part of the agreement.
Honestly, Hamas's best bet is to probably surrender and leave Palestine. I see no other way. The USA will not stop his bloodthirst. Yeah, no, famously, it was always Hamas. Except it wasn't, right? Hamas is but an idea, all but a name. It's nothing, okay? Hamas is simply the newest version of militant resistance against the Israeli apartheid. That's it. It's going to be called something else. When you orphan 40,000 children in the Gaza Strip, it's going to be called Hamas too, okay? Do you understand? It's going to be called something else. There's always going to be an understandable need for emancipation. This is the most human thing, okay? That's it. That's it. So as long as Israeli sovereignty reigns over the Palestinians, there will always be some kind of resistance. It doesn't have to be called Hamas, and it is throughout Israeli history in its 76 years of occupation. Okay? It's taken secular forms, Marxist forms. It's taken Islamist forms in its last iteration that still maintains a coalition alongside all other varying degrees of political ideology. That's it. And this is something that I think a lot of Israeli generals, including even fucking Rear Admiral Dumbo Hagari, understands and has talked about. When Israeli generals say there is no military solution to Hamas, that is precisely what they mean. Okay? And he can hear me. Even though I'm in Japan, he can hear me all the way from Israel right now. Maybe he's heard me when I've talked about these things, and that's why he also has communicated this reality. When Israeli generals like war criminal Yoav Gallant, the former defense minister, says there is no permanent military solution to eradicating Hamas. We cannot solve this problem through military action. This is what they mean. What they actually mean is that unless you kill every single Palestinian, and even then, there's still going to be, a lot of people that live in diaspora. Like, there's always going to be a need for emancipation. People are always going to say, no, what the hell? I don't want to live under your rulership. This is insane. This is completely unacceptable. You're killing my family. You've destroyed my home. You've destroyed the mosque I go to. You destroyed the church I go to. You destroyed the school I went to. You killed my teacher. You killed my cousin. You killed my uncle. You killed my mother. You tortured my family. Do you understand? Ironically enough, the actual solution to ending this unnecessary bloodshed comes from, once again, pressuring the state that is responsible for the bloodshed and the violence continuing. It's making sure that Israel actually meets the standards of international law. That would go an incredibly long way of curbing back most of this violence, okay? And the only way that can be done is if the American government decides, all right, our designs for the Middle East have changed. And through this war of attrition, we have recognized that it's probably better that we abide by the standards that we are supposed to abide by under international law, and we are forcing Israel's hand to, carve out a real humanitarian solution here.
Whatever the cause of the delay, hugs for the children they feared they'd never see alive again. Just some of the families who've been ripped apart since October 7th.
I love you, all the citizens of Israel who supported our families and our soldiers who did everything for us. Thank you very much. I love you.
Heartfelt reunions in Israel and the Palestinian territories. But beyond the numbers and the stark asymmetry of the two prisoner swaps, this ceasefire is far from guaranteed, with negotiations for what's called stage 2 of the deal due to start this week.
Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to Jennifer Gavito, who's a former US diplomat and now a senior fellow.
The father of one of the hostages, by the way, just a reminder, Eli Albag, father of Israeli POV Liri Albag, who was released today, he made it very clear after the potential deal he's seeking the genocide should continue in both Gaza and the West Bank. He says, in these 10 months, another 50,000 terrorists were born in Gaza. There are 2 million Hamas people, and there are 2 million more in Judea and Samaria. For me, they're all Hamas, says Eli Albag, father of the Israeli prisoner of war, Liri Albag, and one of the main figures in the captives' families' pro-deal campaign, said these words on Hapatrotim talk show on Netanyahu's propaganda channel outlet, Channel 14. Channel 14 is the Bibist network, the premier Bibist network in Israel. He made it very clear after the potential deal he's seeking the genocide should continue in both Gaza and the West Bank. His daughter, Liri Albag, 19, was taken captive by Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades on October 7th, along with several other Israeli occupying force spotters from the army base where they were serving in Nahal Oz. Bro, when you say a terrorist was born, you just lost the plot. I think there is a more sinister admission of the truth there. Okay? Like, on the one hand, yes, it's just blanket racism. It's just pure, unfiltered, unrestricted racism, right? But the other side of that is this admission, or rather the recognition that, yes, we are doing unimaginable cruelty to these people, and I think that's justifiable. And the cruelty necessitates, one, because of the initial racism, but the cruelty necessitates because these people will always resist against our incredibly violent endeavors. Okay?
Atlantic Council. I asked her about the delayed release of civilian hostage Arbel Yehud and how much of a problem it might cause.
There is a great deal of speculation about why that might be. There have been accusations that perhaps she's being held not by Hamas, but by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and that still has to be worked out. Whatever the reason, the release of the 4 IDF soldiers this morning, surrounded by Hamas fighters, presented quite a striking picture. Right. And that might have, in fact, been what Hamas was agitating for. That being said, the Israeli government was very quick to point out that this was a violation of the ceasefire agreement. And my understanding is that there are urgent negotiations happening as we speak.
And you mentioned the footage that we've all been seeing of the 4 soldiers. To what extent is that going to make it more difficult for the moderate?
This is Pete getting got by propaganda. He could direct his anger to fixing the situation in the future and be an activist, but instead he got propaganded and focused on his energy on genocide. Unfortunate. Yeah.
In Israel to continue to work towards a ceasefire and a durable one at that.
Despite the Israeli government's assertions and attempts, Hamas still exists and continues to be a force to be reckoned with. And so in my mind, that really just reinforces the urgency of moving ahead with the ceasefire. In fact, figuring out how to get Palestinian Authority control over Gaza in order to displace Hamas. And more importantly, down the road, the importance of rebuilding, showing Palestinians that there is a different Hamas leadership, and that there, with Israel is some sort of pathway to peace.
And how realistic do you think it is that Palestinians do find a way to support other leaders in Gaza that are less likely to choose a militant path?
Certainly more challenging than it was pre-October 7th. The Palestinian Authority has been, through its own actions and through Israeli actions, has really been undermined, diminished over the course of many years. And so there's a lot involved with this, as both of the recent U.S. administrations have spoken about. You have to reform the Palestinian Authority. You have to give Israel confidence that its borders will be secure. I mean, these are years-long undertakings. This is not a short-term project. And before you can do any of that, you have to find a way to rebuild Gaza. You have to provide homes, food, really critical humanitarian assistance. And so far, there doesn't seem to be a good plan in place to do any of that.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're grateful for your insights.
Take care.
In the midst of this frenzy, coaches carrying around 60 prisoners returned here to the West Bank to be greeted by a wall of emotion.
So I take it because you never dove deep that there is no real Palestinian censorship on TikTok? I'm not entirely certain as to how much censorship is happening. I think that there is a understandable panic right now, and some of that understandable panic might be real. Okay, but I don't know. I don't know like how severe the censorship is currently.
Among the crowd, Safia, waiting for her son Ishmael. In Israel, convicted of attempted murder, but to her and most in this throng, saluted as a hero.
We're thanking God. This is our state of mind. Thanking God for this life. Thank God.
This a prayer of gratitude for her son's return.
It is noisy and it is chaotic, but here there is a sense of jubilation as well, because for many in this crowd, these coaches and the prisoners inside them represent a victory over Israel.
Again and again, we hear chants in support of Hamas. The released prisoners taken to a community center for health checks.
You found a straight up Nazi influencer on TikTok and they denied your hate speech report? That happens sometimes, though. That happened even before. TikTok is both simultaneously the most like insane and intense terms of service, upholds the most insane and intense terms of service standards, but also simultaneously will be so like loose sometimes, regardless of like political ideology. It's very weird. Like, it's not, I don't think it's as deliberate as it is on like Twitter, for example.
Some went on to hospital, but most emerged into the embrace of family, friends, and well-wishers. This man is Ahmed Musa, released after 13 years behind bars. He claimed he'd often been beaten in prison right up until his final hours. He was overjoyed at freedom.
My message to all the Palestinian people, wherever they are, including in Gaza, West Bank, and abroad, you have mastered the art of creating joy despite the hardship and the genocide we are dealing with. And to all the free people, I say this: prisoners in Israeli prison are dealing with the worst.
120 prisoners found guilty of the gravest crimes were expelled from Israeli territory. Just over half deported to Egypt, the rest sent into Gaza. Here on the West Bank, the sight of these men coming back from captivity seemed like a seminal moment for many. But the spectre of conflict goes on.
I think the future is going to be more sadness for us. Because, you know what I mean, like everything will get bad from Israel occupation for us. I think, especially in West Bank.
Are you scared?
Yeah, of course.
These men were convicted by Israeli courts of some of the most serious crimes possible. Yet now, suddenly, they're free. And that is the price Israel is paying for its hostages.
Emily Gaudin is following the story for us. She's our correspondent.
Hello, Emily. I'll be back.
Hamas released 4 Israeli hostages today. What's going on with them back home?
That's right. They were reunited with their families at a Re'im military base We already saw the footage of them being embraced by their parents, and they were then flown by helicopter to the Rabin Medical Center outside of Tel Aviv, where they're undergoing medical treatment and a medical evaluation. That's also where they met other family members, such as their siblings, for example. Now, we've already heard as well from a top official in the Israeli Health Ministry about the treatment that they're receiving there. So far, they've gone through quite an extensive medical evaluation that was, quote, emotionally and medically complex. But I think it's safe to say that for the families, it's a huge relief in and of itself to see their daughters come back alive.
Right. Now, as part of the ceasefire, Israel has also released Palestinian prisoners. What do we know about them?
That's right. So for every soldier that Hamas released, Israel, for its part, released 50 Palestinian prisoners. Now, we're talking about some 120 of these prisoners are said to be serving life sentences in Israeli prisons. Some were convicted for multiple murders, including the killing of Israeli civilians. That being said, there's also some very young prisoners who were released, the youngest one being 16 years old, the oldest one being 69 years old. And we also know that the most serious offenders didn't actually arrive in the occupied West Bank. They were taken out of the country via Egypt to neighboring countries such as Qatar and Turkey.
Right. So you filmed with a young Palestinian woman who was part of last week's prisoner release. Let's have a look and come back to you afterwards.
It was the day Amal Shujaya had been waiting for. After 7 long months in an Israeli prison, she was finally released as part of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas.
The joy is indescribable, thank God.
Almost a week later, we meet her at home with her family in the occupied West Bank. She's still getting used to being here, the memories of the day of her arrest still etched in her mind.
When we were taken to the detention center, the forced strip searches for female prisoners began, which is a very bad experience that Palestinian female prisoners go through when entering any detention center. They would do these searches daily. Often late at night, they would confiscate our clothes, our personal belongings, dishes, and pots.
Amal was studying journalism in her last year at Birzeit University near Ramallah when the Israeli military arrested her for what they say was inciting violence.
The occupiers were opposed to student activism on the university campus, even though this student activism is officially approved by the university administration.
For her family, it's a relief to see her back home, having been prevented from visiting her for the entire time she was incarcerated. Amal says that was one of the worst parts of being in prison.
We'd see our families just for a few seconds during the court session, which was held electronically. We would only see them for very brief moments. If I tried to communicate with them during that time or signal to reassure them I was in good health, the soldier would cut off the connection, and everything would end there. It was a feeling of deep oppression and humiliation.
Reports like these are common among Palestinians who were released from Israeli prisons, according to the prisoner advocacy group Adamir. This, together with reports of starvation policies, overcrowding and lack of proper medical attention. And even when people are released, they may not be free for long.
All of the detainees, whether being released to the West Bank or to East Jerusalem, they need to continuously show up for court appointments. And in this, it's very possible that the detainee could be easily targeted and faced with rearrest, basically. Because with all previous sort of exchange deals that we've seen before, the detainees were subjected to rearrests, even the November 2023 deal.
Yeah, they have done this already, even in this new crop of detainees that have been released. I am doing some stretches, sorry. I have to stretch because if I don't, my lower back, I mean, even when I do stretches, my lower back gets pretty messed up by the end of the day.
not majority, 27 of the freed detainees were subjected to rearrest.
For now, Amal is trying to settle back. She tells me that she wants to get back to her podcast that she started at university and finish her degree to become a journalist herself so she can continue telling the stories of other Palestinians.
Of course, being arrested will not stop us from delivering our message, from conveying our cause to the world. But honestly, we'll be more cautious in how we deliver the message.
This a reflection of the uncertainty many Palestinians face as they look to their future.
Emily, good reporting there. So your protagonist was arrested for inciting violence. Are there many other released prisoners who were arrested for such minor crimes?
The short answer to that is yes, and it is something that human rights organizations have continuously criticized Israel for. When we look at the women and the children who were released last weekend as part of the first phase of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, many of them were arrested for example, what they wrote on social media, for participating in protests, or especially when it comes to kids, for throwing stones. And the Israeli and the human rights organizations even go as far as to say that Israel is, as in fact, incarcerating people in order to have them sort of in their prisons as a future bargaining chip when it comes to negotiations such as what we're seeing right now. So really heavy accusations there regarding the conditions under which Palestinians are being arrested, on top of the conditions of the Israeli prisons themselves that the UN also has criticized on multiple occasions over the last few years. And what's important to say here, I think, as well, is that what we're hearing from human rights organizations is that since the attacks by Hamas on October 7th in 2023, the intensity of the arrests and the conditions of the prisons themselves has rapidly, it's deteriorated incredibly.
Right. DW's Emily Godin reporting from Jerusalem. Thank you. Now, Amjad Shawa is head of the Palestinian Non-Governmental Organizations Network. He joins us now from Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza Strip. Hello, Mr. Shawa. Some Palestinian prisoners released today just arrived in Gaza. Tell us what's happening.
Yes, they just arrived to the European hospital. We have medical check after they arrived, and they are waiting for that they can manage to meet with their families. Part of their families were killed in this war. And just to correct what you have mentioned, they are not the criminals who were released today. Amal wasn't committed any crime. Amal, she was struggling, demonstrating her opinion about the occupation, so she was arrested. So it's not minor crime.
Yeah, one of the freed hostages was rearrested. In clear violation of the deal, Israel's rearrested freed captive Ashraf Zikir after raiding his home in Al-Quds, Jerusalem. He had just been released a few hours ago after spending over 2 decades in prison, only to be arrested again. Not sure exactly what happened here. I don't know what the details are, but the unfortunate reality of the matter is that given that Israel has completely destroyed the communications, the media, the only media that reports from the West Bank, like consistently, with the exception of like maybe Anadolu Ajans, the Turkish media, like they banned Al Jazeera, so we don't get like real-time information from trusted resources as fast as we normally would. It's crazy. Yeah, so if you're wondering why Israel kills all of these, if you're wondering why Israel kills all these journalists, like there's an obvious reason for it.
It's what the crime to arrest Amal herself and to put her in such detention conditions. Today,